Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. So welcome everyone. Today we're excited because we get to have a podcast going on multiple Big Blend radio channels because this is such a cool story. It's an awesome book based on a true story, and it's got a little women's history. It's got some history. It's got road tripping. It's got travel. And of course, a good book is a good book. So we have author Laurel Corona joining us. She's an award-winning author. And a lot of people have been waiting for another book from her. And after a decade, here it is. It's called Aloha Wanderwell Takes the Wheel, again, based on a true story. And you can go to her website, laurelcorona.com. It's linked in the episode notes. But welcome to the show, Laurel. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
And this is exciting. So you took a decade off, right? And then suddenly something happened and you found a story you needed to get back to the pen.
Yeah, I just found publishing. I love to write. I've always loved to write, but I just found the whole publishing aspect of it to just be too much. And so I just started doing other things. And I guess I must have been waiting for somebody to be important enough to write about. But I think probably of 5 ideas a week for new books. But it's such a commitment to write a novel, especially a historical novel, that you give your life over to it for at least a year, maybe 2 years. And nobody rose to the occasion until I met her. And the minute I learned about her, she just demanded that I write a book about her.
Well, I think she is a demanding character, and you get that from travel.
Absolutely. I mean, I just would not want to cross this woman. I mean, if she says write about me, I have to do it.
Well, there you go. So tell us a little bit about her, because Aloha is not her actual name, right? This is, and yeah, how did she even get that? So she was born in Winnipeg. This is a true woman who she drove 500,000 miles.
Yes.
Through 80 countries.
Yes.
And a Model T Ford.
Yes. Well, it was a Model T chassis. The cars were actually kind of built from the chassis up for touring. And Walter Wanderwell, who we'll talk about, I'm sure, was really a master engineer. He was self-taught, but he just designed these cars based on the Model T. And of course, they always called them Model Ts because they were getting some funding from Ford. But, when you think about what a Model T looks like, their cars did not look like that. And you look at the cover of the novel, and the one that the cover version of her is writing in is absolutely nothing like the cars they were in, but it's still a cute little image.
Yeah, so she's interesting because she was Winnipeg, Canada, and I bring that up because we love the Jefferson Highway here, and the historic Jefferson Highway goes from Winnipeg to New Orleans. It is called America's first vacation route. It's Vacation Highway, the very first international highway, and there's a revival for this. So I know all these road trippers, and she was a road tripper from Winnipeg. She was an epic road tripper. I mean, that is just, because women didn't do that back in the day. So when did she start on her great adventures?
Well, she started in 1922 in France, but you asked me about her background. So let me fill in a little bit about her life. Yeah. She was born in Winnipeg, as you mentioned, and then her family relocated to Vancouver Island when she was, I'm not sure how old, maybe she was 6 or, around that age. She was still a young girl. And I discovered her because I also live on Vancouver Island in Victoria. But at any rate, so she grew up there, and she ended up, through a long series of things that we really probably don't have time to go into, that she ended up in boarding school in Nice in France when she was 16. And she was a complete wild child. I mean, she'd learned to roll her own cigarettes by the time she was 13, and, would always sneak out of school to go to the movies and things like that. But she was in Nice in this boarding school, and she ran across an advertisement in the paper for this guy, Walter Wanderwell, who was doing this around the world expedition by car. And he had put in this advertisement because he needed a secretary. And this idea of being on this expedition really appealed to her, even though she had 0 secretarial skills. But by then she did know how to drive a car. So that made a difference. So what he would do is, he was kind of the first person to make money by traveling and making movies of it, and then showing the movies. Like we have surf movies and ski movies, but his was the first one where he would take pictures or movies, actually, of every place that he visited. And then by the time he got 100 or 200 miles from that place, it was exotic because people just didn't travel. I mean, you could show people pictures of the California coast in in Omaha, and it would just be incredibly exotic. And so he was making money just a little bit at a time by charging admission to see his movies. So she joins this expedition that way. But at any rate, the funniest thing is she's only 16 when she does this. She's still in school, and her mother really surprisingly went along with the idea of her joining this expedition. And her only concern, because Aloha was indeed a wild child, was that she not do anything to disgrace the family name. And her name at that point, her birth name was Idris Hall. And so she thought, well, what the heck? I'll just change my last name to Wanderwell. And so she did that. And then she realized that she didn't really want to be Idris anymore either. She was starting over from scratch. Her life was going to begin now. And so it was a childhood nickname, Aloha, because she used to love to hula. So she said, okay, I'm going to be Aloha Wanderwell. And that's how she got her name.
Wow. Wow. So what did Walter think of that?
I'm not really sure. I think he was just happy to have her along. She was 16 and she was very, very pretty and very tall. She was about 6 feet tall, and she spoke several languages. So she was helpful to him because his films were silent movies, and so he had to narrate them to the audiences. And he was in France and he didn't speak French, so it was very appealing to him to have this striking young woman come on stage with him and do the interpretation of what he was saying. And her mother agreed that she could be on this expedition only while it was still in France. I think she suspected that Aloha would come back considerably tamed, that it wouldn't go well, and she'd come back and be a little easier to control. But the truth of it was she changed her name to Aloha Wanderwell and never looked back.
Wow. And, it's a wild ride to go traveling at that age. And I've done that in a different format. And pretty much, I mean, we travel full time. And it's so funny because we're reading about this at 500,000 miles. And I'm going, are you sure it's the same car? Because I want to get to between 500,000 and 1,000,000 miles with our car. And we're on our way. And I don't want to, and it's just because they become part of your journey, and I always think like, we have all these vintage cars, and why do we keep getting rid of these? Why can't we just keep hold of these babies, And so she gives me great inspiration.
Well, I don't want to burst your balloon a little bit, but it wasn't all the same car. They did get different cars as they went along. Yeah. And sometimes they had as many as, say, 4 cars on.
Oh.
Because they very often had other crew as well. Although when she drove across India, she just drove across with Walter in 2 cars, and they had 2 cars. So it would be very clear that she had driven the whole way. It was really important that she drive, not just that she go. So wow. There were quite a few different cars, and they also sometimes had motorcycles. They sometimes had like supply trucks. And so
they had a convoy.
At some points, it was a real convoy. At other points, it really was just them, the 2 of them. They ended up marrying, actually, but so they were a married couple for a while. Largely, I think, because it would be scandalous for this in this time for this man and woman to be traveling together that much without being married. So
I wonder if he changed his name.
He did, yes. He was from Poland, and he had one of those names that doesn't have enough vowels so that people who speak English can figure out how to pronounce it.
Boy, I think he lived up to his name too. Then
Yeah. His name was Valerian Pazinski.
Oh, boy.
And so he changed it to Walter Wanderwell, but he was always known as Cap. That was his nickname for captain, basically.
Well, this is so wild because I know it starts off with, this mystery of LA. It's another, LA has a lot of his hidden mysteries. It really does. And he is one of them. So did you read about her first or him first? Like who came first?
Well, she came first, definitely. Yeah, actually. And we'll talk about the murder of Walter Wanderwell later, but it still counts. If you look up greatest unsolved mysteries in Los Angeles history, it'll show up as one of our greatest unsolved crimes. And although in the book, you discover that it wasn't really unsolved. There was just no one who was ever convicted for it. But I discovered her first. The way I discovered her was I was new to Vancouver Island, and I used to go walking with somebody that I had just met, and she knew that I was interested that I was a writer, and that my through line for all of my books is it has to be a woman that deserves to have her story told, that it's either been forgotten or she's been misrepresented or whatever. So my friend Joanne just said, oh, here's this book, and it's all these interesting people from Vancouver Island. It's just this tiny little book. And I was leafing through it and I came across the name Aloha Wanderwell. Well, doesn't that stop you dead in your tracks? So
Yeah.
It was just like maybe a 3-page profile of her. But boy, by the time I finished that, my recess as an historical novelist was over. And, I was back to work almost immediately.
Well, because back then, women, I mean, we had to have chaperones a lot of times,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean, this was, and for a young girl, for the mom to be okay with that.
Yeah.
I mean, going from boarding school, that is like, because as a kid, I went on the road and then went to boarding school, and it was like being put in jail for a minute there. And I walked out, I walked off the property every single day and did whatever I want and didn't adhere to any laws because I was used to pretty much being an adult. And I was around her age when she did it. But this is not, I mean, she was completely unchaperoned. I mean, this is wild.
It really is a surprise. Her mother is a real mystery to me, why she was so kind of uninvolved with Aloha. But Aloha, I think that her foundational story that is part of the reason why she was so independent is that she really saw her mother as having betrayed her. And there were a number of betrayals in her life. She was left in this boarding school in Victoria when she was 10 because her mother went off to England with her younger sister because her father was injured in World War I. And so Aloha is just dumped in this boarding school in Victoria at age 10. And she doesn't understand why she doesn't get to go. Why can't I go too? He loves me as much as he loves my little sister. And her mother didn't really explain it. And then she found out later so that was kind of core of a mistrust of her mother. And then later she found out that actually the man that she thought was her father was not her father. And her mother had just never bothered to tell her that. And the reason that she hadn't been able to go to England with them was that she didn't have any papers. During the war, you had to have papers proving your relationship. And she didn't have any paper that proved her relationship to the injured soldier. So her mother just doesn't tell her that that's why she's staying. And she feels abandoned and hurt. And then on top of that, she discovers that her mother's lied to her about who her father is. And so there was no warmth in the relationship between them. So I think that that's part of why it was really basically pretty easy for her to ignore authority because no authority had ever really done anything that she could see that was very admirable.
Right. And at that same time, you learn to trust yourself and only yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. She was. Yeah. And I think in the book, one of the ways she was always misbehaving in school. And one of the way I described it was that she figured out that she wasn't misbehaving. She was just being who she really was. That she wasn't being bad on purpose. She just had this essential integrity that just didn't allow her to behave in ways that she thought were phony or restrictive in ways that they shouldn't be. And so she was just a real true spirit or free spirit.
How did you find out all of this about her? Because I think there's like one Wikipedia page or something, but I mean, are there books? I mean, because she, like, I would have thought, because she is like the Amelia Earhart of road tripping.
Yeah.
Really, right?
She is.
Because Amelia Earhart, you didn't mess with her either,
Yeah, yeah.
And, she was, but we still don't know how she died, but we kind of know, but we don't know, right? But at the same time, we know about her because of all the media attention.
Yeah, yeah.
But how did you find out about, Idris or Aloha?
Idris, I know, yeah. Well, when you're a historical novelist and you have an idea for a book, the first thing you have to do is see if somebody's written a biography. It has to be a well-researched, it doesn't have to be scholarly, but it has to be a well-researched book that you feel you can trust. And if there isn't one of those, then forget it because you're just not going to ever find out enough about the person to write their story. And I was lucky because there's a really, really good biography of her by Christian Fink Jensen. It's called Aloha. I can't remember. It has a long title about all the wonderful things she is, but Chris Fink Jensen's biography is fantastic. And so I was just able to use that as my bedrock source. And Chris lives in Victoria as well, so we've become friends since. So, I could ask him questions about her too. But so that's it. And then Aloha also wrote, well, technically or theoretically wrote an autobiography, a call to adventure. But Chris, in the research that he did, discovered that basically it's just a fabricated story. She just makes up things right and left that aren't true, like that she snuck into Mecca disguised as a Muslim man and was able to participate in the Hajj. It's like, no, she didn't. That did not happen. You did as a man, especially if you don't speak Arabic and you don't look like a man. I mean, that did not happen. So she was not above just making up things that she thought were great stories.
She did her own dime store novels.
She did. She absolutely did. So Aloha herself doesn't end up being that reliable a source for information, but it makes a great read. She didn't, by the way, she did not like it was ghost written basically. And she didn't like it either because not for that reason, but because it made it sound like a lot more fun than it was. It was, now we're going to push our cars through the mud and it's going to be.
No, it's hard. The things that she did is really, really difficult. And, I think the romance of this kind of stuff wears off fast.
Yes.
And if you're in it for the long haul, you have to kind of understand the journey, not the destination for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that the most amazing thing to me about her is that she didn't quit. I mean, she's only 16 years old and she gets into this really, really difficult travel situation. And then it's compounded by the fact that she falls in love with Walter Wanderwell and he is, and so they have a romantic relationship, but he's 10 years older than her and he's very sophisticated. And I don't think that he just wasn't capable of being the man that would have healed her. And so she was in love with a difficult man. And so, but she didn't quit. I mean, she did storm off at I think only one point that she actually left the expedition. No, twice. She left the expedition because she was so pissed off. But then she came back and kept doing it until he died. Actually, she continued to do it after he died, but it wasn't very successful.
Wow. So his death was a murder, which, right?
Yes.
Well, I don't want to see that's it's historical fiction, right? And this is the beauty part of it is you're learning history. And, Nancy and I, my mom and I both, and she wrote a really cool review, everybody. Check that out. Linked in the episode notes. It's cool. And she read it like literally to me, like just, this is so cool. Look at this. Look at that. Look, this is so cool. She loves you, right? She said, this just reads so fast. You feel alive reading it.
Oh, that's great.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So and then she's like, but this and that. And I'm like, you are so ruining it for me. She didn't, because I'm like all enthralled with her because she was famous at a point, right? She really was, but writing historical fiction is really a big deal because it teaches us something, but also it's like it allows your mind to have some imagination as a reader as well. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. But so in this case, I know it's funny because you don't want to give away spoilers, but he's murdered. We learned about the murder on page 3. So it's not like
it's real. Yeah. It's real. And it's there. It's a real thing anyway. You look him up on, exactly. I know everyone's going to go type in everything, right now. It's like, yes, they're on Wikipedia, but, but then, and that's the other thing. You can't just believe everything on Wikipedia either.
Right. Yeah. But the biographical aspects of the book I wrote are 100% correct. I did not make up or alter really anything. I told the story the way it happened. The difference between what I do and what a biographer does, like Chris Fink Jensen, is that he tells you the facts and makes a good story out of the facts. But novelists are the ones that can add the things that a biographer can't.
Emotional.
I can imagine a conversation and I can imagine what she would be thinking. I can imagine what the experience would be like in ways that a biographer can't. So the biographer gives you the foundation for it. But it's my contention, and this is kind of my soapbox, is that women's history is lost overall. I mean, with this, she's in the modern era, so we have her story. But you look at stories like the story of Penelope and the Odyssey. That is the subject of my second book, Penelope's Daughter. Their stories just have not come down to us, and most of them have fallen out of history entirely. And we know even the ones whose names we remember, we know very little about them. But they were there and they were real. And if we just sit around and wait for scholars, we're never going to have our history because it's gone. And so you just have to take what is there and say, this was a real person. This person did have a real life. And so it's not false. to fill in the rest of the story. I mean, what I feel like I'm telling a different truth, that I'm telling an emotional truth or a person's truth, even though I am not sticking entirely with the facts. And I think if novelists don't do that, that women cannot have their history. That's why I think that historical fiction is such a critical genre for teaching us about history, because other than that, the scholars can't do it for us because it's gone.
No, storytelling is so important because it puts the human emotion into it, whereas a textbook sucks unless you have that kind of brain that can do that. And the storytelling, it's like I know a history teacher, and the way he got his kids in the class to understand certain wars is he had them reenact it. And then they became a certain soldier. Well, who is this soldier and what did they do? And then they could put the human into it, whereas a textbook kind of takes the human out of it. And history is just good gossip. There's a lot of pain in there. There was a lot of pain and bloodshed and everything. But the other way is to travel and go to these sites of where things have happened, go to someone's home, if you could have seen one of the cars she was in, that would be cool, because it's tactile, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So I think novels often end up in movies and, that kind of thing too, which also brings out the human part is a big deal. And I grew up reading historical novels I think I really started around 8 or 9 and I was obsessed with it. I read like War and Peace and stuff and I thought I knew what I was reading until like I had to reread it and then reread it again as you age, But you guys who write historical fiction to me are godsends in telling stories that we need to hear and also telling stories that we just never get to hear about. But she was famous, but now like, why isn't she as big as Amelia? Like she should be, or Nellie Bly.
Yeah. I mean, yes, true. I mean, there's so many stories that haven't been told, and I guess you didn't have a good publicist, huh?
Yeah, really. There you go. Well, you do. You do. I know that very well. That's really cool. So would you want this to be made into a movie?
I've thought that people ask me that, and I was thinking, to me, it would make a better miniseries because it is very episodic. Very episodic. You could definitely chunk it over 4 or 6 episodes. Yeah.
So in researching it, did you go down rabbit holes? Like I would just even to see where she was and what it looked like at that time.
Oh yeah. Well, this is my 5th novel, so I've kind of learned to streamline that. So I don't go down too many rabbit holes. So my first one, which is about Vivaldi and it's called The Four Seasons, and it's about Vivaldi and his work with an orchestra of female orphan musicians in Venice. And, female orphan musicians is not something you hear in one sentence very often. And it was this amazing institution that had one of the great orchestras and choirs of Europe. And it was all cloistered girls and women, most of whom had been abandoned and had grown up there. And the ones with talent, they had developed into superb musicians. And he came in to teach them. And as a result, it was really as a result of having this choir and orchestra that he was able to be Vivaldi, because he had this remarkable institution. These women lived for music. And so whatever he could write, they could play, and they pushed him and he pushed them, and he really would not be a major composer without them. Why do we not know this? And so, but at any rate, that your question was about the research. Boy, I went down a lot of rabbit holes in that one. And I learned some stuff about Baroque music before I figured out I didn't really need to know that to write, to write this novel. And so now I kind of am pretty good at knowing what I need to research. But I would say when I'm writing a book, I'm probably on Google 5-6 times a day just to find out things like, were the tires solid or were they rubber? Did they have air? That kind of stuff. I like learning stuff about Model Ts and that sort of thing, and learning things about the roads, like how much of a road was really there in that year. And so I'm trying to be as truthful as possible. I don't want to make mistakes, and so I'm constantly researching, but it's not rabbit holey anymore. I research things that I need to know the answer to.
Well, and things are at the fingertips that weren't years ago.
Absolutely.
In regards to researching and things like that. But exactly the roads go ahead.
Yeah. When I first heard about the orchestra of Vivaldi's, the female orphan musicians at the Pietà, there wasn't even Google. And so it was something that stuck in my mind. And then when the time came, it popped out.
Man, I know when you talk about the roads and them driving with like their tires and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you just got to think how they were doing it, and they would camp, camping roadside kind of thing, and
Yeah.
having, these what they called tourist camps back in the day,
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
research of Jefferson Highway. And I'm going, man, you're camping in, Louisiana next to a swamp. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really good. A few mosquitoes here and there, and I love Louisiana, so no knocking Louisiana, whatever, but you're going to get that in Minnesota too. You're going to get those mosquitoes
Yeah.
but they would do
Exactly.
it. And what, now we're like, hey, the hotel electricity went out for a few minutes. Let's
Yeah.
complain. So I think
Yeah.
that's the other thing about historic novels is it by getting that human factor of how they survived and having courage and those kinds of things, and how women, I mean, even how women were dressed back then compared to now, was that
Yeah.
part of it? Because, I think it was long after that women were wearing pants, right? When did women start? That was the other thing.
Now, that's
Travel.
another thing. I know in his advertisement for a helper that he said that you have to be willing not to wear skirts. You could never wear a skirt. So that
Oh,
would
so it
kind
must
of
have been
indicate that it
started.
was pretty unusual, but they were doing it then. But I can't remember when like Amelia Bloomer and all those people came in. I don't I don't
But the fashions, I mean, even then, it was just so, they still weren't the nicest clothes to have to wear on like this kind of travel.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. She
Yes.
was more than willing to ditch the kind of clothes she was supposed to wear. I think she would have liked to be able to wear a few more cute flapper dresses, but she was more than happy to have the uniform.
I would too. I just kind of, yeah, I wouldn't be wanting to wear a dress on a road trip that's pretty
No.
epic around the
Well,
country.
they didn't even have doors in their cars, too. Cap arranged them so that they would be as light as possible, and a door, the hinges, and all that would add a couple of pounds to the car. And so you had to hop over to get into the car. So they were totally designed by him. They were made largely from aluminum because nobody was using aluminum at that point, just to make them lighter. Because he knew that they might have to lift the cars over things, or they had to be
Yeah.
able to push them without, they had to be as light as possible. And so
Mm.
he was a real innovator. But
Mm.
yeah, so the skirts would have been impossible. Can you imagine trying to leap into a car
Well,
through the
it's like
equivalent of a window?
riding side saddle. Remember back in the days,
Yeah,
women had to
yeah,
ride side saddle. So
yeah,
this is so cool. But even going overseas, that's another thing. How many women traveled overseas at that point,
yeah.
unless it was an immigration situation? You know
Right,
what I mean?
right.
All
Yeah.
going on the same ship, which is not like going on cruises, which I know you do. You're you're a lecturer. You're a cruise lecturer. I've got a friend who does that. She's on the other side of Canada from you. She does that. She's in Nova Scotia and she does, and she absolutely loves it. So
Yeah.
are you enjoying that part?
I am. I've been doing it since 2012. So except for
Yeah.
a couple of years of COVID, it's now 14 years. And I've been on every continent except Antarctica at this point, and been in over 100 countries. And I don't even know how many ports, but I love it. It's great. It's a way I've seen things that I never believed I would see. Seeing huge reclining Buddhas in Thailand, and just Maori villages, and that you just would not. There wouldn't have been any way I could have done that with my own money. I just don't have that kind of money. So the Silver Sea and other ships have enabled me to see the world in ways I could not have imagined.
Mm. Do you connect with Aloha in that level of learning about the world through travel? Did she feel that as well? Like that wanderlust, like have to keep going out and keep traveling?
Yeah, I think she was. I think she wasn't terribly well educated, as you can imagine, because she was in a finishing school by they were teaching her how to dance and that sort of thing. And so, but I think she was a voracious absorber of the world. I think she was very intelligent and just learned incredible amounts from the travel. And so, yeah, I think so. And that's how I feel too. When I think about the person I was at 16, though, I mean, I was, really more concerned about, whether that cute boy might like me, or, what, I don't know, whether my hair looked good that day, or, something like that. And then she's off deciding to do this. It's very humbling.
Well, I wonder, I mean, for her to go out there, it's kind of like a challenge. And she was open-minded already, but through the story, she gets even more open-minded in all
Yes,
kinds of ways. It
in all
just gets a
kinds of
little
ways.
racy, I'm just going to say. Not going to say everything, but everyone will find out. But it seems like as you travel, there your those rigid belief systems that we set up here in this country went away a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. She was definitely open to anything and just absorbed the things she was learning. I think, though, when I think about her psychologically, that it really became an addiction. I think as much as anything is an addiction, that it was not possible for her not to be traveling. You know, she would be home and it would be like needing her next fix every bit as much as any other kind of addiction. And so, yeah, she really enjoyed the traveling, but she really couldn't stop either. And I know that there were times, I don't really go into this very much in the book, I just hint at it, but there were times when she was really pretty depressed because she didn't really actually want to be where she was. She wanted things to be easier and but yet she didn't want to be home.
Yeah. No, I understand that. We're not good at not traveling either. It is addictive because it's just I don't know how to go backwards now. I get it. So you've written a story of someone I can't believe I didn't know about. So I really thank you on that. What's next on the horizon?
Well, I have another book coming out next year.
She got you going. She got you going.
Well, no, actually, she didn't. It's interesting. My late husband was just in the last days of his life around the time that I finished up the first draft of another novel because he was always home and I needed something to do. So I was finishing up this novel. And then when he died, I just put it aside because I didn't really want to think about it. And that was around the time I was starting to cruise. So I just put my energy into that instead. And so I had this novel written. And then what sometimes happens when a publisher takes a book is they ask you, so you got anything else? And I said, well, yeah, I have this book. And I went back and looked at it and did some more work on it. And I really like it. So it's already done and it's in the works it's in the works to come out next May. It's already in the publishing schedule for Sibylline. So my next one's done. And then I'm kicking around some ideas for subsequent books. And there's one particular female pirate named Mary Read that would make a really interesting book. So maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. But the one that's coming out next year is called The Intuitive. And it's about this really shameful little chapter in American history where the United States government paid women who this particular man, Henry Goddard, believed that some women were super intuitive and they could just size somebody's intelligence up by looking at them. Mm-hmm. And so the United States government paid for these hyper intuitive women to come as an experimental project to Ellis Island and watch these poor immigrants who had just come off of steerage and, were just, in bad shape and decide by the way they looked, whether they were morons or not. And moron was a word that this guy, Henry Goddard, who had this project invented. So their goal was to pick out the morons so that they would be sent back home and they would not be allowed to pollute American stock by breeding. So this actually happened. And I just, that story really stuck with me. It just deeply. And so the story is basically about one of these intuitive women or theoretically intuitive women. She didn't think she was intuitive and how she gets involved in this and immediately starts developing moral qualms about it. But these moral qualms sort of open up her socialite world to understanding the real issues that face women and that face poor people and that face immigrants, so that she becomes this. Just her heart opens, her life opens, and the book begins with a tragedy where she loses her son and her husband in an accident, and it ends with her house being full again because of all these people that she's been able to love that she wouldn't have been able to before. So I think it's very uplifting, but it's really based in this really tawdry thing that happened. It's really a shame. And it's a shameful thing for American history.
Well, it's interesting when you think about it because we are the ones bring your healthy, bring your weak, here we were asking people and advertising, I was talking about this earlier, like how, Eastern Europeans were coming over because they were getting ads, for, the cities paved in gold and they would get here to work and it was awful and really terrible. And so, people would come over and it wasn't safe for the women and sometimes they were separated from their wives and children. It was all different and it's just interesting. So, and to have that's horrible. And now, when we look at America 250, I think it's really fascinating that, we have to look at the whole American experience from our indigenous people who are here first, all the way to these stories that you're sharing, because history repeats itself, as you know.
Yeah.
So Aloha created Instagram. She was the first influencer, but it's just when you look at how we cycle around, and I think that's the beauty again of historical fiction, is that somebody could pick up this book, maybe 100 years from now and go, wow, even deeper understanding,
Yeah. And I think when I think about that book, if it had come out when I wrote it, it wouldn't have nearly the power that it will have now, because we're really seeing this. It's like a gift to me that I put it away for all that time, because I think it's going to be so relevant now. Especially not just because of the immigrants, but because in the United States, how women's rights are eroding. And so to be reminded of, there's a lot of it is involved with her getting involved with the suffragist movement. And so to be reminded of the heroics of the women that got us the vote, and to be reminded of what you're talking about these terrible conditions that these people endured, and then they became bedrock in the United States. So it's got a lot of messages in it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, wow. And you just think, I'm going to go back to Aloha and her story about traveling the world and what she saw compared to what America says, and that's the thing about international travel. You see the good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly, you see all kinds of things. So you are able to make your mind up or form opinions that are more realistic than what, media tells you in a way.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I think historical novels bring you to that.
Yes.
Where you're seeing things from different perspectives,
Yeah,
especially one that includes travel.
Yeah, especially now that there's such a push to have stories written by people from places that aren't written about, like learning stories about a woman in India, or an African, or a person from the Caribbean, learning not just about their experiences in that culture, but what happens to them when they go to another culture, like they emigrate somewhere, and the story of them in their immigration story. So many books are coming out that are telling us about women that are from places that we've barely even heard of. And we learned so much from them about other people's lives. It's so eye-opening.
Yeah, it's the same thing as, how women have been also involved in industries, and people think, oh, they're only now becoming involved in these industries.
Yeah.
And that's like, no, they just never got the spotlight on them. The men always got the spotlight, but they've been in it for some way for longer than we think,
Exactly. Yeah. We get books about brilliant Black mathematicians who are solving big problems in aerospace, and we have female astronauts. There's books that have come out on both of those in the last few years. There's just so many wonderful books that are just reminding us that we've always been half of the population, and we've never just stayed home. I mean, maybe most women probably became homemakers, but there was always lots of women who were doing all the same things men were doing.
The very first museum in the world was created by a woman.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. The very first piece of literature, a poem, was written by a woman in Mesopotamia, But when we hear about the first literature, we don't hear about that. We don't hear about that one. We start later, like Beowulf or Epic of Gilgamesh or something, but the very first piece of recorded poetry was by a woman.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is good. Well, you're inspiring. Thank you for sharing all these stories. And I can't wait to dig into Aloha. I have to put it down for a bit because, some people tell the story too much. I'm just saying. It would be my mom here who loved it. So everyone, check the episode notes, and you'll be able to see what Nancy had to say, which she loved it. So, And you can go, again, the book is out now by Laurel Corona, and you can go to laurelcorona.com. Link is in the episode notes. The book is Aloha Wanderwell Takes the Wheel. So I love this. I'm so excited, and I love to hear about more women on the Jefferson Highway. And it's so funny because Nancy's done this huge, because we're doing the Jefferson Highway travel guide, and we run the podcast every month. And she's done this encyclopedia of women. And you know what? We didn't know that Aloha, who she was in Winnipeg. You need to add her to the list, Nancy, to the list. But she doesn't get documented as like some amazing human who did this amazing thing, right?
Yeah.
But she was famous at times. So how does that just drop off?
Yeah.
So, wow. Very
the story
cool.
of our lives.
Thank you so much.
You're
and
welcome.
Can't wait with your next book. Please keep us posted.
Okay. Thanks so much, Lisa.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.